30 years is a long time to share a life with someone, and yet it can feel like the longest stretch of silence when the heart is left unfed. In the early years, everything felt alive. The smallest brush of skin carried weight, the way a hand would rest on the lower back, or the way a kiss lingered long after lips parted. But slowly, without any single explosion or reason, the affection began to fade. Touch became a routine gesture rather than a doorway to intimacy, and the marriage bed turned from a place of warmth into something cold, almost lifeless. Desire became something hidden away in the corners of the mind, a quiet ghost haunting the nights, whispering reminders of a passion that once lived but seemed long dead. For years, the body grew accustomed to stillness. It became easier to accept the silence than to fight it, easier to live inside a shell of duty than to demand more. Nights were spent staring into the dark ceiling, listening to the rhythm of another person's breath, and wondering if that rhythm still held space for the kind of closeness once shared. The hunger inside grew weaker, as though the body forgot how to yearn, how to ache for a touch that meant more than routine. And then, almost without warning, it happened. It wasn't planned, nor was it something sought out with intent. It began as the most innocent moment, a conversation that lingered longer than expected, a look that held just a second too much meaning, and then a touch, just a single brush of fingertips. It was nothing more than an accident on the surface, yet beneath it, something stirred. A pulse that had been buried deep for decades suddenly came alive. The skin tingled, the blood rushed, the breath caught. That forbidden touch carried electricity, as if it had traveled through years of silence to strike the soul awake again. The body remembered. The ghost of desire, once thought dead, rose in an instant. Every nerve seemed to scream for more, not in desperation but in recognition. It was as though the body whispered, "I am still here, I can still burn." A forgotten fire flickered in the chest, spreading heat through veins that had run cold for far too long. It was terrifying and intoxicating all at once, terrifying because of what it meant, intoxicating because of what it promised. That single touch became the beginning of a storm that could not be stopped. Suddenly, eyes that had grown used to looking past began to see again. The way hands moved, the way words sounded, even the pauses between breaths felt alive with meaning. The night itself seemed to change, filled with an energy that had not been felt for decades. The air carried weight, thick with the tension of what could happen, of what should not happen, but of what the soul desperately craved. When lips finally met, it was not gentle, it was not careful. It was desperate in the way that only two starving souls can be when they finally taste what they have been denied for too long. Every kiss was a release, every press of skin against skin an answer to years of questions left unspoken. The body, once dormant, remembered every rhythm, every ache, every pulse of longing. And in that remembering, something greater was discovered, not just the pleasure of being touched, but the aching relief of being wanted, of being alive in someone else's eyes. The guilt did not vanish. It lingered, pressing against the edges of every moment. Yet even guilt could not quiet the hunger. Decades of silence had taken something essential, something that was not about betrayal, but about survival. That night was not about seeking escape. It was about reclaiming what had been lost, about stepping into a space where love and desire intertwined again in a way that made every cell remember what it meant to be human. The body trembled not from fear but from awakening. Fingers tracing over skin felt like poetry, breaths caught in throats sounded like prayers, and the closeness was not just physical, it was spiritual, as though the soul had finally found its mirror after being buried alive for so long. The night stretched endlessly, each moment heavy with the knowledge that this was forbidden, and yet each second more necessary than the last. There was no need for words. The silence that once suffocated was now filled with meaning, with the sound of hearts racing, with the gasps of rediscovered pleasure. Nothing about it was rehearsed, nothing about it was expected. It was raw, it was real, it was the kind of moment that cannot be captured in explanations. It was a secret, but it was also salvation. When the dawn finally came, the air carried a different stillness. It was not the silence of an empty bed, nor the silence of a hollow heart. It was the silence that follows after a storm, the kind that leaves the world washed clean, fragile, and alive. The body lay spent but alive in a way it had not been for years. The soul, once starved, had tasted something it thought it would never know again, not just passion, but connection, the deep knowing that comes from being seen, touched, and wanted. It was only one night, but it was enough to change everything, enough to remind a forgotten heart that it still beat with longing, enough to remind a body that it still carried fire, enough to remind a soul that it was still alive. That single forbidden touch had awakened everything, and once awakened, there was no returning to the silence. That night gave back my soul. It began in the quietest way, with a glance that lingered too long. Nothing about it should have mattered, yet in that 1 second, something in the air shifted. Eyes that should have passed by like strangers instead caught and held, carrying an unspoken language that awakened something buried deep inside. After years of moving through life unnoticed, that glance was enough to stir the silence, enough to remind me that I was still visible, still capable of being seen. The brush of skin that followed felt like an accident, a passing touch, so small it could have been ignored. But when his hand grazed mine, it was as though 1,000 volts surged through a body that had forgotten what it was to feel. My breath caught, my chest tightened, and for one dizzying moment, the room disappeared. Decades of loneliness unraveled in that single fleeting contact, as if the years had been waiting for that exact second to collapse and vanish. The hunger inside me rose like a storm, not frantic but undeniable. It was not just desire, it was recognition. That stolen touch told me something words never could, that I had been starving without knowing it, that my heart had been aching for a closeness so real it could not be faked. Every part of me that had been sleeping woke up in an instant. My skin tingled, my pulse raced, and my thoughts drowned in a flood of need I could no longer deny. The days that followed became dangerous. Every glance carried weight. Every brush of shoulders in a crowded room felt deliberate. The world grew smaller, shrinking down to stolen moments where eyes would meet and then dart away, where silence roared louder than words. That accidental touch became a promise, one that lingered in the air between us, one that demanded to be fulfilled. When it finally happened, it was not planned. We stood too close, breathing the same air, the silence between us charged like a storm about to break. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of wanting. His eyes locked onto mine, and there was no turning back. The first kiss shattered everything. It was not soft or careful. It was desperate, hungry, years of loneliness breaking apart in one breathless collision of lips. The world disappeared in that kiss. The years of distance, of living half alive, were erased in the taste of his mouth, in the way his hands claimed me, as though he had been waiting just as long. Every nerve in my body came alive. Every part of me remembered what it was to be wanted, to be touched not out of duty but out of need. The fire that spread through me was not just physical. It was spiritual, as though I had been drowning for years and finally broke the surface, gasping for air. Each touch after that was discovery. The brush of his hands across my skin felt like poetry, each movement awakening new hunger, new trembling. My body, once numb, remembered its language, remembered how to ache, how to crave, how to surrender. With every kiss, with every sigh, decades of emptiness crumbled into dust. I was no longer invisible. I was alive, burning, consumed in a passion that felt like breathing again for the first time. It wasn't only the body that came alive, it was the soul. To be seen, to be wanted, to be touched in a way that felt like truth. It healed parts of me that had been buried for years. His arms became a place of safety and fire at once, holding me close while setting me ablaze. The guilt of what it meant lingered, but even guilt could not outweigh the ache of being alive again. It was not about betrayal. It was about rediscovery, about claiming back the pieces of myself I thought were gone forever. The night we shared stretched endlessly, each moment heavy with meaning. Time itself seemed to bend, as if the universe paused to allow us this stolen space. I remember the sound of his breath against my neck, the trembling in my chest as his touch traced along my body, the way my voice broke with need. I remember the way every kiss tasted of both desperation and salvation. I remember the way my heart raced not only from passion, but from the realization that I had been waiting for this my entire life. When it was over, the silence was no longer hollow. It was not the silence of distance, but the silence of two hearts too full to speak. I lay awake, feeling the rise and fall of his breath beside me, feeling the warmth of his body against mine, and I realized something I had forgotten long ago. I was not dead inside. I was alive, more alive than I had been in 30 years. The loneliness that had defined me had finally broken. That glance, that accidental brush of skin, had opened a door I thought was forever closed. It was not just a moment of passion, not just a night of forbidden touch. It was the rebirth of my soul, the proof that even after decades of emptiness, the heart can still awaken, the body can still burn, and love, deep, raw, and undeniable, can still feel like breathing again for the very first time. And I will never forget the night that gave me back my breath. The weight of what was happening pressed against me even as my body surrendered to it. Guilt clawed at the edges of every breath, whispering of betrayal, of vows, of years built on loyalty and routine. Yet at the same time there was a deeper pull, a hunger so raw it silenced reason. It was the hunger of being seen, truly seen, after decades of invisibility. The hunger of being wanted, not as a duty, not as a shadow of who I once was, but as a living, breathing woman whose body still carried fire. That hunger devoured guilt, drowning it under waves of desire that surged higher with every stolen second. The first kiss was like a confession. My lips trembled against his, tasting not only passion but something more, something pure, something honest. It felt like truth, even though it was born in secrecy. Every kiss after that was deeper, hungrier, like two souls trying to make up for all the years they had been starved. My body arched into his touch as though it had been waiting for this exact moment, as though it knew this was what it had been craving all along. His hands moved over me with a certainty that stripped away every layer of loneliness I had worn for so long. Every touch was salvation. Where I had once felt emptiness, there was now fullness. Where I had felt cold, there was now fire. His fingertips traced the outline of a body I thought had been forgotten, awakening every nerve, reminding me of a language I had once known but buried long ago. Each brush of his skin against mine pulled me deeper into the truth of what I had been missing, of what I had been denying. It was not just physical hunger. It was the hunger to be cherished, to be remembered, to be alive. Still, the guilt came in waves, crashing into me between the moments of surrender. I thought of the years behind me, of the face I had shared a bed with for decades, of the promises spoken under sacred vows. For a heartbeat, shame would grip me, sinking its claws into my chest. But then his mouth would press against my neck, his hand would tighten at my waist, and I would break all over again, unable to resist the pull. Desire swallowed guilt whole, and I let myself be taken by the truth of what I had longed for in silence. The night became a battle between the mind and the body, but the body always won. His eyes burned into me, and in them, I saw no judgment, no hesitation. I saw hunger, yes, but also reverence. To be devoured in that way was not simply lust, it was worship. It was as though every inch of me mattered, every sigh, every tremor, every shiver beneath his touch was sacred. I had been starved of that kind of devotion for so long that when it came, I could not turn away. My voice broke in ways it hadn't in years, gasps and whispers spilling into the darkness, confessions that weren't words, but sounds pulled from deep within. His lips answered them all, covering me in a fever of truth. It wasn't just the heat of passion. It was the sense that every kiss, every touch, every press of his body against mine was rewriting me, erasing the emptiness that had defined me for so long. I clung to him as though letting go meant returning to that hollow silence, and I couldn't bear it. The hours passed as though time itself had paused to allow us this secret night. The world outside ceased to exist. All that remained was the rhythm of our bodies, the racing of our hearts, the collision of guilt and desire that burned brighter with every passing second. And though guilt never left completely, it shrank under the weight of what I was feeling. For once, I wasn't invisible. For once, I was not just a partner in routine, but the center of someone's hunger, someone's fire. When exhaustion finally settled over us, I lay in the aftermath, my body trembling, my heart pounding, my soul torn between sin and salvation. The guilt returned stronger then, whispering of consequences, of what this night meant beyond the shadows. But when I turned to face him, when his hand brushed gently against my cheek, the hunger inside quieted into something softer, something like peace. For the first time in years, I felt whole. I knew the weight of betrayal would follow me. I knew the silence of mourning would bring questions I could not answer, burdens I could not escape. But in that moment, as his arms wrapped around me and his breath warmed my skin, I understood something with clarity. It was not just passion I had found, it was myself. Every kiss had tasted like truth because it was truth. Every touch had been salvation because it had saved me from a life half lived. The night was a secret, one that carried both guilt and grace, but it was also the night that gave me back my soul. That night was unlike anything I had lived in decades, not because of what happened in the body, but because of what it awakened in the soul. For so long, I had moved through life as if half asleep, doing what was expected, wearing the smile, carrying the duties, sharing a bed that no longer felt like a place of closeness, but more like an arrangement of habit. I had convinced myself that emptiness was normal, that passion belonged to youth, that desire was a chapter closed long ago. Yet in the stillness of that secret night, everything I thought I had lost came rushing back, raw and undeniable. It began not with urgency, but with something far more dangerous, tenderness, the way his eyes held mine, the way his hands trembled before they steadied, the way his breath quickened as though he too understood that this was not just about skin against skin. When his arms closed around me, I felt more than a body pressing close. I felt years of loneliness being stripped away, peeled back layer by layer until I stood bare in more ways than one. For the first time in years, I wasn't just touched, I was held. The intimacy went beyond passion. His lips traced not just flesh but memory. They reminded me of what it was to be wanted, to be chosen, to be desired not out of routine but out of fire. My body, long resigned to silence, began to awaken, trembling beneath the weight of being seen again. Yet what moved me more deeply was not the hunger of the body but the reverence in his touch. Each caress spoke of care, of recognition, of something that felt like devotion. I realized then that this night was not about betrayal, not about lust, but about resurrection. My soul had been buried beneath years of neglect, and in the fire of intimacy it rose again. Every sigh, every gasp, every unspoken word became a prayer, a release, a confession that I was still alive. I clung to him not only for the pleasure, but for the proof that I had not vanished into the quiet of a loveless existence. The way his hands moved over me felt like healing. They lingered as though memorizing me, as though each line of my body mattered. I had forgotten what it was to be touched like that, not in haste, not in indifference, but with awe. It was as though he was reminding me that I was still here, still whole, still capable of inspiring desire. The emptiness that had lived inside me for so long began to dissolve, replaced by warmth that spread through every part of me. The night stretched endlessly, every moment drenched in meaning. Time no longer felt linear. It was as though years of silence collapsed into this single space, this single connection. His breath mingled with mine, and I felt myself inhale life again, not just air. Every kiss fed a hunger deeper than the body. It fed the hunger of the soul to be known, to be embraced, to be cherished. There were moments where tears stung at the corners of my eyes, not from sorrow, but from the overwhelming truth of what I was experiencing. I hadn't known how starved I was until I was fed, hadn't realized how much of myself had gone numb until every nerve was alight with sensation. His voice in my ear, the weight of his body against mine, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, it all wove together into something more profound than passion. It was belonging. It was being found after being lost for so long. Even in the height of passion, there was gentleness, a hand brushing away hair, lips pausing to savor, eyes searching mine as though looking for my permission, my truth. It was not just about taking, it was about giving. And in that giving, in that shared vulnerability, I rediscovered myself. I was not just a wife, not just a mother, not just a woman defined by years and roles. I was alive, burning, desired, and whole. When the storm of desire finally softened, when the gasps gave way to silence, I lay in the circle of his arms, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. Not because guilt had vanished, it lingered in the back of my mind, but because the emptiness was gone. My soul had been fed, my body remembered, my spirit touched. The weight of years had lifted, if only for that night, and I could breathe again. I knew the world outside that room would return with its demands, its judgments, its unrelenting responsibilities. But in that space, in that secret night, I had been given back to myself. What happened between us was not just sex, not just forbidden desire, it was salvation. It was the fire that melted away the ice of neglect, the arms that carried me out of years of silence, the intimacy that reminded me of my own existence. That night gave me back my soul. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unforgettable true love stories.